We're three guys that are going to be talking with a female caller about an IUD. So we try to get educated, and we made some little examples for you at home. So this is kind of like an IUD. Bill, what'd you get?
Not to scale, but I think relatively accurate.
It's pretty close. Adam?
Yeah, I thought you said IED, so I'm ill prepared.
Okay. All jokes aside, this is a serious call, and it might affect you or a woman you love. Let's get into it on Hardly Legal. Ariel, you're on Hardly Legal. You got an IUD, and then they accidentally didn't remove it. Tell us what happened.
So I had an IUD inserted in 2013. After 2 weeks of intense pain, I had a doctor's appointment. At that doctor's appointment, they did an ultrasound, scanned my uterus, and determined that it was no longer in my uterus, and that perhaps it has fallen out into the toilet. And, while you're here, let's just give you some, let's set you up for your next appointment to give you a Depo-Provera and send you home. And I had a newborn at the time. She was 6 months old. So fast forward to 2023, and I had a scan for kidney stones, and they didn't find any kidney stones, but in the notes, they actually wrote IUD in lower left pelvis. They didn't say anything to me and sent me home saying, oh, well, you don't have any kidney stones. Here's your antibiotics for your kidney infection. Have a great day.
Now,
and
I have to ask
6 months later.
I have to ask you a question.
Sorry.
So
yeah.
I'm not a doctor. I'm also a guy. Right. I'm male bodied. I got no womb here. It sounds wrong for it to be in the left pelvis. That's not the place it should be, right? Like that in and of itself is unusual.
Correct.
I just don't understand in what world someone wouldn't tell you that they identified that.
Yeah.
During a scan or something.
Yeah, as if I live like that with it in there, and that's where it should be, and I don't know. Anyway, so my doctor found it 6 months later in those notes and pointed it out to me, and I ended up having surgery to have it removed in November 2024.
So you had it in there for how long? 9 years? 10 years?
11 years.
Wow, in the wrong spot for 11 years.
Yes. In my hip area, moving around, a free-floating object.
And did you feel it? Like, were you aware of it?
I don't think that I was really aware that it could have migrated outside of my uterus, so I trusted that maybe, yes, it fell out in the toilet, and I had a lot of pain in my hip region from inflammation. So inflammation pain, and I was always told that if I lost weight and I worked out harder and drank more water, that would get better.
Also not a doctor, but I will say that having a foreign object in a place it's not supposed to be in your body would lead to inflammation. Your body is, inflammation is literally the body saying, hey, fuck this is in the wrong place.
Not that this necessarily matters, but do you know, how common of an occurrence is this for an IUD to, get displaced?
I don't know the percentage. It's a smaller percentage, I'm sure. I don't know how much of it's not being reported.
Right.
I don't know.
And that would also imply that it's not doing its job of being an IUD, because if it's in the wrong place, it's not.
Yeah. I know enough about the birds and the bees to know that an IUD in the pelvis is not doing its job.
Yeah.
So can I ask, what was the brand of IUD that you had?
I had to go back and get my documents from that 2013 encounter, and I was able to get that, and it did state that it was the Mirena.
Oh, the one that has been subject to thousands of lawsuits for side effects, including designed, produced, and knowingly sold a defective product that would cause all types of different issues. And one of the specific side effects, number one, device migration.
Wow.
I had a question about whether it was really known back in 2013 that this was a problem.
There's definitely by early 2018, they had announced a settlement to resolve thousands of Mirena-related lawsuits. So it wouldn't be surprising, given how long the Mirena has been around, that it started to become an issue. But every medical device and product and service and vaccine or whatever has, some kinds of cases. The question is how bad is the case and how many are reported. But I wouldn't be surprised if by at least within 2 or 3 years before that so maybe 2015, they started to realize this was a problem. And really, I would say, again, I don't know the legal side of the warning requirement. You have to look into that. Is the question of when providers are actually giving you a product that later has a problem.
Isn't it like a recall on a car?
That's what exactly.
Like,
I was thinking
you,
it's
yeah,
automotive. I mean, I get notices for cars I sold 10 years ago.
And we'll put this on the screen, but just so, I pride myself on being the dumbest person in the room usually, and I just had to look up what the actual size of the device. It's pretty small, that. It makes complete sense that could migrate.
I think, what I'm thinking and hearing all of this is like, let's assume that the doctor who inserted it originally did everything right, and they're not as known then. Yeah, they didn't know that this could happen. It was an issue with the device itself. Let's assume all of that and give them the benefit of the doubt. If when you go back in 2 weeks later and you're describing intense pain, how are there not tests done at that point to ascertain where it actually is, rather than saying like, well, it probably, it came out when you were peeing and you probably flushed. Like, that's not like a probably scenario. That's a we need to figure out where this thing is. So that's to
verify that it's not in the
liability
body.
Really
Right.
is, and where there's like malpractice involved.
It's also different types of liability too, because it's like, okay, it's not just this device is going to migrate and then cause like pain and the other suffering that you've had, but also it's supposed to be preventing pregnancy.
Sure. It's
so
literally
now,
not
so
doing
now it's
the
literally
job
not doing.
Yeah.
So questions. So did you have other pregnancy complications over that 11-year period?
I have some insight too as to why I was kind of shuffled away. Like, I didn't have pain currently at the doctor's office, because the pain that you feel is the pain of it going through that uterus tissue. And once it's freeze loading in the space, you can't really feel it because there's not a lot of nerves in there.
Yeah.
Wow.
It wasn't until way later when the inflammation started to affect me. And to your question, I did have a son, and so I not knowingly had that in my hip while carrying a child. There might be complications he might develop complications or have things, about him that are different, that would have been different if this wasn't in my hip.
Well, there's a wide variety of problems that have come from the Mirena related lawsuits. So first of all, just by the numbers, there were 1,200 reported cases of ectopic pregnancies, and then over 100,000 pain or symptom related reports related to these. So you're not alone in having to have something that could have come from it, and these are pretty wide variety. Like, some of the top ones that are listed here is that you could get a pseudotumor cerebri, which is basically an imbalance inside of your brain that can put pressure on your brain. Not exactly sure how that's caused, but it's basically something related to the hormone imbalance caused by the IUD being in the wrong place, which can cause vision changes, dizziness, headaches, nausea, vomiting, difficulty walking, memory problems, tinnitus. So again, this is kind of secondarily removed. The IUD moves, it causes a hormone issue. The hormone issue causes brain pressure. The brain pressure causes you to have these kinds of symptoms, which you would never go, oh, this piece of plastic inside of my womb. Even if it moved, you wouldn't necessarily understand that it could cause those kinds of issues, which is frankly how a lot of this goes under the radar for so long.
But I'm genuinely floored at the idea that when you got a scan or ultrasound or whatever it may have been when you had or thought you had kidney stones, if they see something like that, how in the world are they not immediately telling you about that?
Right.
I just want to clarify. So there was the original ultrasound, which is a sonogram, to see if the actual device was still in the uterus. It can scan an actual organ. And later, 11 years later, was when I never need to go to the doctor. I'm not a frequent hospital, I don't need that. So I get this CT scan, which is the whole hip region for the kidney stones. So it was, So the original ultrasound, the device had already completely moved out.
No, that I understand, but I'm saying
send me home.
when you did ultimately 11 years later get that scan for the kidney issue, if they saw it at that time, if I'm understanding you correctly, you were not made privy that information, and then you had to find out from another doctor
yeah.
6 months later. That's what I'm confused about. I don't know how they wouldn't tell you that.
Because it was an ER doctor and somebody wrote a note somewhere, and then the ER doctor just saw me for what I was there for, and then I just got sent home again, and nobody said, hey, that's not supposed to be there.
Even if you're making, $2 an hour at TSA, if you see something, say something. Right.
Yeah,
my kindergartner knows that. So I'm floored as well. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
So have you?
Yeah, I had many ultrasounds during my pregnancy with my son, and of course they're not going to see it because they're looking in the
when you got pregnant with your son
in the uterus.
When you got pregnant with your son, you were trying to get pregnant, and you thought you didn't have an IUD. You thought it had been removed, correct?
I thought that they had told me that maybe it had fallen out in the toilet.
Okay.
Maybe that's why, because my body rejected it that way, and my body rejected it internally.
This is fascinating.
And was trying to push it through my backspace somehow.
Yeah, this is horrific, but it's also it's just fascinating. Like everything about this is like you don't even think it could happen.
Well, and unfortunately, it very much lives up to what we've all heard about, like women basically not being believed in doctors' offices, like in a habitual way, where you say like, this is something that I'm feeling, and people are like, no, just lose weight. Or
and then
just,
even worse,
it's
it's
insane.
like she says something, but even if she hadn't said anything, it's in the fucking notes.
Yeah,
it says in the notes. There's this. It took someone else years later, months or years later, to finally go, oh, look what this guy found.
I actually there's a lot of things about AI that are like really scary, but one of the things that is like not scary and like really exciting is that they've already had AI models that can like look at the data and look at the sheet and be as accurate or more accurate than a human doctor.
I agree.
I feel like a Nintendo 64 could probably pick up on the fact that, hey, the IUD's in the wrong spot. Like you could use old technology and find that. So have you Ariel, I'm really, really sorry this happened to you, but let's try to talk through the justice process. So have you talked to lawyers already about this, and what are they saying?
I think that there's a lot of lawyers that don't understand actually what happened. It's a really hard timeline to try to understand and pick apart, and I think that a lot of people's responses is just based off of it's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
I've had lawyers tell me that it's the defect, because it's the IUD's defection, that would not be a case because all of that was already dismissed. And then I think that it would be neglectful from the original place.
Yeah,
but
because it feels like there's multiple claims. So it feels like there's a product and a product defect claim, but then separate from that, there's the moment when the doctors noticed that it was wrong and then failed to tell you. So it feels like, have they talked to you about the two separate claims of that?
I've talked to so many lawyers, it's really hard for me to keep track of who's saying what. All I'm hearing is just no's, and then I try to make sure that they understand, and then I just move on if they don't, respond to me.
Let's try and help sort this out, and maybe we might be able to narrow it a little bit. So from what we've looked at on this, basically the first lawsuit started in 2014. There is within the law protections for doctors when they are following the right procedures based on what's known at that time. Even if there are lawsuits or risks, they're not obligated to go and tell you everything about every moment or accusation that's happening. If the FDA has approved it, which it was FDA approved since as early as 2000, and then it got kind of expanded in 2009, they're allowed to prescribe it. Now, if they prescribed it for the wrong thing or they didn't ask you the right questions, but it doesn't seem like that's the issue. So I think a claim against the original doctor is going to be pretty hard. This isn't like this guy was like, hey, I got one of these. It expires next year. I don't know anything about it. I'm going to put it in you. That would be a problem. That doesn't seem to be the case here. So then let's fast forward to the question of the provider who is actually looking at your body and what they were supposed to do. There's a potential claim there, but if they're only really looking at one part of your body and they're really just providing a scan, the obligation for them to go, well, let's run down every rabbit trail.
Right.
It's
one of those
harder.
like where it's objectively wrong, but it might not necessarily be illegal.
Correct.
Right.
It might have been any right person would have just done a little bit more searching around in the most likely places, right? Oh, it migrated to your shoulder. We're not going to check your fucking shoulder. It's like never ever happened. We've never ever heard of that happening, right? But moving into the pelvis, that's the simple Google search says that that's one of the issues that could be there. So then there's the question of whether there was an obligation of the one who did find it to have said something about it at that time. And this is going to differentiate by state, but at the end of the day, the most important thing to focus on is talking to a doctor or to a lawyer who has medical professionals who have actually dealt with this particular issue, so they can run through those secondary or tertiary effects that might have happened. Because again, you might have had ringing in your ears. You might have had literally one of the symptoms of the pseudo-terminal cerebri tumor is that you would have depression that would be caused because of the hormonal imbalance that this IUD would create by being in the wrong place. Not to get too in the weeds, but the IUD in the uterus has a certain release amount. When it goes into another part of your body, the fucking governor comes off and it can just let out however much it wants, which is how it can create these issues depending on your body makeup, your circumstance, who you are as a person and your body makeup. But it's going to be a lawyer who's actually dealt with these cases that can go through and go, hey, we're going to go through this checklist. We're going to check you. We're going to get to a doctor who's seen these kinds of issues and go, can we check these off to make sure they're not there and that you haven't? Best case scenario is that you've suffered the normal aches and pains of life and gone through it, and it is not attributable to this. But you owe it to yourself and to your son to check and see with someone who knows it whether you suffered some of these things that just wouldn't seem directly connected, but are.
Wow.
I have a question for the two lawyers that I think might be important for Ariel. You mentioned that at some point there, because of the fact there were like thousands of these cases with this particular company, that there had been like a settlement of some sort. Yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What it legally? So let's say Ariel, when that settlement was happening, would have had no idea that this was all going on. Now, after the settlement has already been paid out, finds out that something has gone wrong that is clearly like an issue with this product. Is there a way to like retroactively get what should have been your piece that you were entitled to after a settlement has been paid out?
So two types of massive litigation usually happens with medical products or drugs or that kind of thing. It's either a class action or it's multi-district litigation. This was multi-district litigation. So a bunch of individual lawsuits were consolidated under one judge. So this one judge could make the right determinations without 50 different judges making 50 different determinations on 50 different timelines. In a class action, you would have gotten notice and they would have said, hey, you got to either opt in or you got to opt out or whatever it may be. Because this is multi-district litigation, her case will stand on its own. There might be some questions of statute of limitations, but there's this thing called tolling or the discovery period. When could you have reasonably discovered that you had the issues or suffered the damages? So those are the kinds of questions that an attorney would dive into to see if that's an issue. But again, if it's either that the original product was so defective that she might still be a part of or be able to get money from a direct Mirena lawsuit. Separate from that is the question of whether or not the doctor who she had seen before had some kind of duty that they failed to execute on, and that might be a separate, more recent claim.
Because we have the caller here right now. Yeah. Let's break it down into bite-sized pieces, right? So she's talked to a bunch of attorneys already. They haven't, and just to the general public, the people watching, like a lot of attorneys work on contingency.
Yep.
And so because of that, it means that they don't take any money up front. They incur the costs and they feel like they need to win big. They're like, we have to see a big settlement here. So if a case looks hard or if a case doesn't look big enough, they'll pass on it. And so it's part of why we started this show, honestly, because there's a wide range of cases that really affect people. Like you're being affected right now, caller, and the money just tends to not look right. And so a lot of lawyers pass on it. It's really hard to get people access to legal care. So saying all that, right? Like what do you feel like she could do?
Here's what we'll do. There's a couple of lawyers that have been very successful in doing this. They've represented hundreds, if not thousands, of women who have dealt with this Mirena-related lawsuit. Again, it's entirely possible that after some preliminary investigation, it's not directly tied, or there's no real way to prove that there's a tie to anything you've actually suffered and the actual IUD or where it migrated or the lack of investigation. Right?
I do have one more question. I'm sorry. I know.
But we'll send you those names. We'll send you those names.
We'll send her some more names on that front. But when you've talked, I know you've talked to a lot of lawyers about a lot of stuff, but have you specifically kind of zoned in on that doctor or that hospital's mistake in not informing you? Is that something they've done an analysis on, or have they just focused on the product side?
I feel like they're just focusing on the product side. I haven't had anyone be specific about that. No.
Yeah, and that's I would say when you're going in, there are two major parts. If you're breaking down the timeline and describing this very quickly, on the first end, I would say I had this IUD in, it migrated. There have been many lawsuits about this. I'm talking to a lawyer who's done those lawsuits.
You can actually make it even simpler if you want to just write this down or make a note to help you keep track of this when you talk about it in the future, caller. You've got two issues here. The first one is a product defect, product liability issue. The second one is a potential medical malpractice issue. But they're two separate issues.
Correct.
They're not.
Those are the two issues.
So when you talk to an attorney, you could end up having a 30-minute conversation and not get into the medical malpractice analysis. So just remember that when you talk to people, and we'll get you these names, you want to start the call with, hey, there's two issues here. One is a medical malpractice. We call it med mal in the industry. And the other one is a product liability issue or product defect issue.
Yep, that's
Okay.
it.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what I've come to learn through this process since I found out a little less than a year ago. So
we're gonna keep in touch with you and keep trying to help you. Do you feel like you were heard today? I really appreciate you coming on.
yes, I really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Mm.
Heavy. What do you think about
Very
that?
heavy. It's very sad. I mean, it's like, wouldn't you just feel so like disillusioned and like you don't even, when you you are supposed to think that you can like trust medical professionals.
Right.
And like, yes, if there's a product defect, that's on the product to some degree, but like the thing that like blows my mind the most is the idea that somebody would have seen this and not been like, whoa, this is like if you find a car in Steve-O's ass, like that's a notable discovery.
Right. Right.
So the idea that
I took every ounce of willpower for me to. You were talking about foreign objects in the body. It took every
Sure.
every ounce of willpower for me to not make
of course,
the car in the ass.
that's like that blows my mind.
Yeah, it's absurd to think that someone didn't note that and think I'm gonna have to say something about this to let someone know. And again, even if they didn't know what it was, they knew enough to say something was there.
She hinted at it, and I didn't. I felt like it would be kind of rude to talk to her directly about it. But there's like a thing that was implied here, which is really real, and it's double-sided. And one side of it is that there are a lot of people that are overweight that do not take responsibility for their health and kind of abuse the medical system. And the other side of that coin is there's a lot of doctors that don't take fat people seriously, and they do not give them treatment. And it happens on both sides. I've seen both sides of it. And what you see here in this is, I didn't want to ask her, hey, how overweight are you that they're saying that? But it was probably significant. There's also something called polycystic ovary, some PCOS, and it happens to larger women. And I'm sure that a doctor would be like, oh, this is probably just a weight issue. Lose weight. It's probably related to weight. And they're not even looking at the chart. And the chart says there's an IUD that's misplaced. And they're just like, fat woman, I'm not, like, just lose weight.
Yeah, they've been blinded by their own biases.
Yeah, but it's two things for me. It's like, in the first place, when she goes back in 2 weeks later after she gets the IUD put in and says, like, I'm experiencing intense pain, and they do an ultrasound and they don't see the IUD. The fact that at that moment there's not the follow-up of like, well, we need to make sure that this either fell out or it is elsewhere in your body. It seems like they didn't take that extra step and we're like, probably, you probably flushed it down the toilet.
Yeah.
So that initial thing is crazy. And then all these years later, for a completely separate medical issue to come up where someone literally sees the thing in her hip and just makes a note of it instead of coming like busting into the room being like, do you know there's a fucking IUD in your left pelvis? Like that is astonishing to me.
You know that on that first problem that you just mentioned, like someone just saying, oh, it kind of fell out or whatever, right? Like, to me, it's always highlighted a big problem of over trusting any doctor and not getting a second opinion or just kind of double checking is because The only way that they would know about this issue of like the risk of migration is if they had happened to read about it.
Right.
And maybe they read about it in a footnote in year 74 of medical school and they just didn't absorb it, or they just happened to not come into it. But the number of doctors who are just like they're spending all day seeing patients, and then they only kind of research the things that really come in front of them, if they research it at all. And they're just not even aware of the 80% else of things that have been discovered at the time since they went to law school or last went to a medical conference or last happened to read, a journal. And it becomes really critical to wonder and to ask, like, hey, how familiar are you with this kind of thing? And then hope that they're going to even know that they don't know this particular area.
Yeah, or care enough to do the due diligence to find out what they don't know. I think it's I mean, we don't have time to dissect the way medicine works in the US, but like it's the same vibe as when you're on the phone with like a customer service representative and you can just tell they can't wait to get you off the phone. That exists also in medicine, and that's a really scary thing. To think that if you just like have the misfortune of getting in the room with the wrong doctor who doesn't really give a shit. Something fairly major could go unseen, and that, I mean,
and I thought your comment about AI is really great. Like, what we need is something that has a global knowledge that's up to date about what's happening, but has the dispassion so that if he woke up that morning and he went to fucking Einstein's and they gave him an everything bagel instead of a blueberry bagel, he's not so distracted at his 9 o'clock appointment that he misses line 7 that says foreign object in ass, or whatever.
And also AI does not have the implicit bias to say that this is a 250-pound woman versus a 120-pound woman.
Right.
It's saying I'm looking at objective fact and I am assessing what I'm seeing.
AI would never stop the analysis because she's 250. And I think the problem is that you have human doctors that are just going to, like, they could do it. They're capable of getting there.
I mean, I've literally seen doctors like Google reviews that are like 1 star. He just told me I'm fat. Turns out, blah, blah, blah. Next one, 1 star. Told me I needed to go lose weight. Turned out it was something else when I saw another doctor.
And I want to defend the doctors a little bit.
It's not that people shouldn't lose weight.
We all need to lose weight. Like
but it's the stopping of the analysis. It's the stopping of the analysis, the bias. That's the biggest problem.
One thing I wanted to ask, and I didn't want to ask like in front of her because I would assume it would be upsetting.
Do it behind her back.
You called her fat.
I didn't. I said she was probably fat, and that's why I didn't bring it up. No.
In what you were looking at there regarding the defects with this product, did they say anything about it impacting like children who are born when that foreign object is still like
I didn't feel comfortable enough to say I'm not seeing that because I'd only looked at a little bit of it, but from those couple of attorneys that have kind of laid out their cases and what had happened, that was not listed. It was more the most severe was this hormonal imbalance that could lead to a brain tumor type issue, which is pretty fucking serious.
I mean that might be more.
The second thing is, but the second thing was an ectopic pregnancy, which so you lose your pregnancy, and then there was nothing in there about it affecting the child itself who was born, like any kind of defect type of issue. And not to say that there's not, but at least nothing that a lawyer who's very motivated to find every wrong thing was feeling comfortable enough to say on their own website. So it's at least a little bit of a silver lining. But I get her concern because as soon as you crack the wall of trust with the medical providers, and she's now had a pharmaceutical company that she's trusted to put inside her body, the first doctors who looked at her and just noted it but didn't tell her, right? And then, the ones who didn't say go look for it, and then the ones who saw it and didn't say anything, right? So she's now had 3 instances in which she goes, I don't know what I can believe, and the load there on people is so great. I mean, there are whole companies built around second opinions now for that very reason.
And you know what the saddest part of that is? Like at some point, maybe in her future, she's going to find out something from a doctor and be skeptical about it. And they might be right in that case.
Right.
But there's this kind of implicit like fear and mistrust that you're going to just carry around probably forever.
Yeah. I mean, I often think about like, just kind of consumer products, right? We had Coke and Coca-Cola, right? And then 30 years later, we had the Greatest Generation, but we took Coke out of Coca-Cola. And now it's the opposite, right? Now we have all these shitty TikTok kids, right? So in the same way, it can go both ways. What was this good thing that we're now not using? What's this bad thing that we now have
You're
realized?
saying make Coca-Cola Coke again.
They're really not connected, but yes, make
Didn't
Coca-Cola
they have like
Coke
lead
again.
in their paint and their gasoline too? Like I think there's a lot of comorbidities there.
I mean,
A lot of asbestos.
all I'm gonna say,
asbestos too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the Coke and the Coca-Cola was the problem.
I
Or
just
the-
want Coke and Coca-Cola. If Trump, if you're listening, I don't know what you're doing, but don't focus on the Gulf of America. Focus on Coke and Coca-Cola.
I did have to laugh when you said, like, the way I'm sure it wasn't on purpose, but when you were talking about like what lawyers look for when they're deciding to take out a case, like the way you said it sounded exactly Trump. It's like, we want to win and we want to win big.
Gotta win so big. It's true.
It's
true.
interest aligned. It is.
No,
it is
and
There's
interest
so
aligned,
many
yeah.
lawyers
Yeah.
that will not look. Am I a good lawyer? Am I a bad lawyer? Hopefully not. But I'm an honest one, and that it's hard to get a straight conversation with a lawyer. It's so hard to get a straight conversation with a lawyer because they're worried that you're not going to like them. You're going to report them to the bar. They're worried that you're going to make a complaint on their Google review. They're worried that it's going to be a malpractice issue. Like lawyers, it's very hard to get an honest conversation with a lawyer, and so she might talk to 8 people, and they'll tell her everything except, this doesn't seem like there's enough money in it for me. They'll say everything else.
But is it common that lawyers essentially work on a commission where it's like we take no money up front
In
we're gonna-
cases like
injury,
this.
for
Okay.
injury cases, medical device cases, yes, because
I always see that on
there's-
billboards like we don't make anything unless you get
Correct,
settlement. Yeah.
right. So,
Which is a good thing. Because,
is a good thing.
Because there's no one...
It would be
like,
predatory because otherwise they'd be like, oh, just give me $10,000 and I'll look into it.
Well, also, if you're poor and you get injured, you're just shit out of luck. Because
you don't have money to even pay that.
never
right?
have the money to hire a lawyer.
So
Right.
the one thing I will say is that, the crass way to say it is there's not enough money in this case for me. But to a certain extent, the amount of money that's available is directly connected to the amount of damages that the law recognizes. That's not to say harm suffered. That's damages that the law recognizes.
To be fair, because I'm sometimes cynical, it might not even be a money issue. It also could be that there's too much risk. That the case is hard. Because it's not just the money. It's like, oh, I could make this much money, but... Man, these hospitals have really good lawyers and these doctors have really good lawyers.
Right.
And like, this is going to be a long fight and a lot of energy. And I might lose. I might not have the confidence to win that. So it's totally not a money issue. It's just like, I need a sure thing because I got my own mortgage and my own kids and, my own wife.
I mean,
and
like,
then I got
I've-
a girlfriend
I mean,
and
I've
it starts to get
taken-
expensive.
I've taken business contingency cases on behalf of employees who are getting screwed. And you have to go through that underwriting process to decide, like, okay, what if we lose? And I'm out all of this time that I paid for my team and my staff. And, like, I'm going to have to go home and explain I didn't get paid, right? But at the same time, like, there's the question of, like, is it going to be worth the risk, right? You're essentially lending them the time, which means you're lending them the money that paid for the time. So there's an underwriting that goes into it. But at the end of the day, that's why it's even more important to be, supporting local, legal organizations that provide this kind of care. Because there are cases that are just not worth the squeeze for a lawyer, but that still need help because it's good for society. And that, that's a bit of a safety net that really is important, because if you create a whole system that requires people to have trained experts to go into the court to represent you, still the best system in the world, but then you should be able to get those people access. So, yeah.
What do you guys think? Jump in the comment section. Tell us who's at fault here. How do you make it better? How do we fix the medical system? Maybe something about AI. Do we need to lose? Does Adam need to lose weight?
Yeah. Do we need to get Luigi involved?
We're not saying
Luigi!
this is hardly legal. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be here for you when you need that cheap date.